Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're doing another Lessons from the Battlefield. This is something a little different than what we have been doing. So far I have just been showcasing different battles I fight, and I try to pick out some tips from these battles to share with y'all. Now, for this episode, what I'm planning to do is talk about range units in the game. A lot of you on the channel has noticed that I love range units. I think the game is basically the farther the range you have, the stronger it is. Well, I'll explain all this when we go through this range unit display over here. But for this episode of Lessons from the Battlefield, I'll just be talking about how to utilize different range units, what is their strength, compare all the available range units in the game, how to use them in your army, talk a little bit about army composition as well as some character skills that could work well with range units. So let's get started. I set up a custom battle over here. I put out 5 groups of retinues of range units and whatnot, and on the enemy side I placed Liu Bei by himself. We're not actually going to start battle. I'm not going to murder him. What we actually going to talk about is range units in the game. So to start, this group right here are your bow infantry. So in the game there's bow infantry, there's crossbow infantry, and there's siege units. These 3 groups make up the bulk of range units in the game. In the bow infantry, everyone, all character class have access to archer militias. They are the most readily available archer unit. They're also the weakest archer unit, but their strength is basically that they are available to all classes. For a more upgraded version, like say the archer, this will only be available to strategists. How the color coding system work in Three Kingdoms is that blue units, the range units, can be recruited by the blue generals or the strategists, but the militia units are available to all different types of classes. So the fact that they're available to all different classes is their strength. Overall, the biggest weakness of archer militia is their weak morale. As you see here, they only have 19 points of morale. Therefore, if they get charged by cavalry or take a lot of damage from other arrow fires, they will rout easily. So despite the bulk that you see here of 120 men, usually once they lose about half, they will start routing, which will render them useless. In terms of damage, they have a pretty balanced damage from base range damage as well as armor piercing range damage. Fire rate is decent, and ammo is pretty good. Range is 200, so 200 range is actually the standard range for range units in the game. There are some with more than 200 and there's some with less than 200, but 200 is basically the base range you should think about when you're playing the game. They're completely worthless in melee. They do 8 base damage and 2 armor piercing range damage. Basically no charge damage to speak of. If you have to use these guys in melee, you probably already lost the battle. Next, we have the slightly upgraded version from archer militia to archers. Now, only strategists can recruit these. These archers have a little bit better stat across the board when compared to archer militias. The particular standout stat is that they have 32% armor versus the 7% armor for archer militia. They also have quite a bit more ammo. Even though they have the same damage output as archer militia, they do fire at a much faster rate. Their range attack rate is 21 versus the 16 here. They have the same range. Their melee offensive capability is the same. They're just a slightly upgraded version of archer militia. So if you are using a strategist, these cost, I believe, 60 gold upkeep. These cost, I believe, 120. I think it's 120. And this upgrade, I believe, is not significant enough for you to pick archers over archer militias. So early game, these are cheaper. You'll start with them level 1. You need a reform to unlock these. So by the time you unlock the archers, it's very likely your archer militia already gained a few levels and are going to be more effective compared to in your army than replacing them with fresh new recruits of archer units. Therefore, archer militia, I believe, does the job everything archer can do. Although their armor is a little weaker, if you are using your army correctly, you should never have enemies dealing melee damage or any sort of damage to your archers. You got to keep them safe. That's the purpose of how to utilize them in the army. Therefore, the improvement in armor stat is just not significant enough. The improvement in ammo is pretty significant, but it's also rare for you to use up all your ammos in a standard field battle. Perhaps during sieges more ammo will come in handy, but like I said, by the time you have these unlocked, it just might not be wise to replace your already leveled up archer militia with these more expensive freshly recruited archers. Next we have let's talk about these first, the Onyx Dragons. These are the elite archer unit that's available to all factions. They're unlocked at the end of one of the reforms in the blue reform tree. These guys are top-notch archers. If you notice, one of their strength is that they have 250 range. At 250 range, they outrange all other bow infantry. They match the range of crossbowmen. They have maximum ammo of 60, and that can be boosted farther by the cunning ability of your strategist. They do 60 base damage, 23 armor piercing damage. They have the same fire rate as the archer unit, so that's not much of an improvement there. But they do much better in melee. Their melee stats are 19 base damage, 15 armor piercing damage, and they have 52% melee evasion. So these guys can handle themselves in a fight. They have really good morale. They have good charge damage. They have an improved HP pool of 49,000 versus 40,000 of the archers and the archer militias. These guys are expensive and require a lot of reforms, but in the end game, these guys are worth it. These guys are really strong. The 250 range by itself makes them very valuable. And then we're gonna shift to these guys, the E Marksmen. E Marksmen are only available to Liu Bei. Liu Bei has a faction unique unit of E Archer and E Marksman. The E Marksmen are the upgraded version of E Archer, so we're just gonna be looking at them instead of looking at both, because they're quite similar in a lot of stats. The E Marksmen, their standout stat is that they are good in melee. They have 22 melee base damage, 7 armor piercing damage, and 30 melee attack rate. It's comparable to Onyx Dragons, but these becomes available to all your generals despite class if you're playing Liu Bei. So you can have these on any general type, as well as these are available to recruit once your general reach level 6, so they're not restricted by the reform tree. So you can have these out on the field much faster. They also have more armor piercing damage. So the totality of their damage is 83, right? 50 base, 33 armor piercing, which is the same as the Onyx Dragons. But 10 of those damage are shifted to armor piercing. And armor piercing damage, you much rather prefer you have armor piercing damage than base damage. So if you have all 83 armor piercing damage, they're gonna do a lot better than a mix, because armor piercing damage ignore the armor percentages of the enemy unit, and they can only be subjected to being blocked. Well, the range base damage can also be blocked, and it's also automatically reduced by their armor. Therefore, the more armor piercing damage you have on any type of unit, whether they're melee or their range is going to be better off for you. They also have 60 ammo, which matches the Onyx Dragon, but they only have 200 range. So in that aspect, the 200 range is going to hurt them. And also this is a faction unique building unit, so you only get these when you play Liu Bei, which is fine. You can have these as your archer unit for Liu Bei, but once you have the reforms to unlock the Onyx Dragon is a much better unit in terms of being bow archers. So these 4 units are bow archer units. Because they're bow archer units, they all can use flaming shot. Flaming shot is unlocked based on your general's ability. Your general needs to have flaming shot's ability unlocked for your bow archer unit to utilize them. You can switch which type of ammo they shoot. Normally they shoot what's called a standard shot. It has a base damage in terms of a ranged base damage and a ranged armor piercing damage. These stats, I believe, are already reflected in your damage stat on the archer units, but it's basically an add-on to whatever base they have. It also shows their attack base range attack rate. But if you switch over to the flaming shot, you'll notice something. Flaming shot does very little armor piercing damage, right? You have 33 combined damage here, split 18-15. You have 36 total damage here, but split 33-3. So against heavily armored units, you actually don't want to shoot flaming shots. If you're shooting flaming shots, you'll be really doing a lot less damage. In terms of range, it's the same, but range attack rate suffers a lot. It goes from 15 to 6. So you're getting less volleys off, and you're doing less damage essentially. Same range, but the key of flaming shot is that it does 4 morale damage. Sometimes this is critical. A lot of time you're trying to reduce the enemy's HP, but you're also mainly trying to reduce their morale, because most units will rout long before they will deplete all their HP. So by having this ability to reduce the enemy morale, it's what really gives flaming shot its value. Now the argument here is that you don't need all your archers to be shooting flaming shots. So if I have a group of archers here in my retinue, like say this group, I might just pick the weakest one, the archer militia, with the lowest total damage, and make them shoot my flaming shot, right? So all their job is basically doing is to reduce the enemy morale as they charge up, and the rest of them are actually doing damage. That's how I recommend it. So like you have a whole line of archers, maybe pick 1 or 2 of the group to shoot flaming shot, and the rest of them shoot standard arrows. It's a little bit more micromanagement, but it does optimize your damage. It is also another downfall I find personally is that it doesn't look as cool. Flaming shot visually, especially during night battles, just looks visually stunning, versus standard shots with just these little white tracers. Another use of the flaming shot is that you can set defensive buildings on fire. So fort towers, arrow towers, you can set them on fire with flaming shots. It doesn't take many volleys. I actually think it takes about 4 volleys from a fully healthy archer militia to set an arrow tower on fire. By setting them on fire, basically all you need to do is make their fire damage percentage reach over 50%. Once their fire damage percentage is over 50, back up your troops, because it's already considered set on fire, and the percentage will go up all the way to 100. Once the fire damage goes up to 100, the standard damage will also start ticking up, even from 0% all the way to 100, and then the arrow tower is no more. It's actually the most effective way to take out arrow towers, because a lot of time your trebuchets during siege, especially low-level trebuchets, have a very hard time hitting arrow towers on top of the wall. You waste a lot of shots trying to hit those arrow towers. It's much better to send your archer militia. You'll lose a few men, maybe 20 men, but you'll definitely knock down those arrow towers very fast. Lastly, we have this group of bow infantry here called Defenders of Earth. These become available to you once you become king in terms of faction rank. These essentially act as you get 2 defender units. They're like in terms of lore or role playing, they are your defensive units for the capital, for your palace. These, although are bow infantry, bow infantry, they have less range, and they don't shoot standard arrows or flaming arrows. What they shoot is called oil arrows, and oil arrows are basically mini trebuchet shots, right? You really shouldn't think of these Defender of Earth as bow infantry. They're really miniature trebuchets. They have short range, 150, but they do 1,000 armor piercing damage, explosive damage. They shoot really slow. Their range attack rate is only 6, which is exact same range attack rate. It's even less. It's even less range attack rate than the trebuchets, which is 9. So you're doing heavy damage, but you shoot very slowly and have very small range. You have very high morale, but very low health. So these guys won't rout, but they are only have 30 men here. So you see that they're basically the unit size of a cavalry unit, and these are basically mini bombs, and they're best used when you're defending like a city, where you're sitting either on the wall or behind the wall, and you have time and safety to fire off your shots. You definitely can't just field the army of these and use these as your range unit in open field. They just fire too slowly, although the explosive damage is quite nice. You're basically guaranteed to do a lot of splash damage with these guys. They hurt, but they're not really bow infantry. Alright, that covers our bow infantry. Let's quickly move to this group right here. These are crossbow infantry. So if we look here in the back, starting with this one, this is the most basic crossbow infantry you have. All strategists can recruit these. Only strategists can recruit these. They have 90 gold upkeep, so they fall in between the archer militia, 60 gold, and the archer unit, which is 120 gold. I believe. I gotta check that, but I really remember them being 120. So these are 90 gold. They're cheap. They are high damage and high range. Crossbowmen hit farther than archers. They hit 250 range. They have a slower fire rate, but they do a lot more damage. And a lot of those damage are placed on armor piercing damage. So they're the good type. These units are what I actually prefer my strategists to use. The one drawback of crossbow units is they can't use flaming arrows, right? So I assume they're shooting like bolts rather than arrows. They have lower ammo, so you actually really require a good strategist with high cunning to use them effectively. They're also worthless in combat, in melee combat. They have good armor, but I don't think that's going to matter much. And they have slightly better morale than the archer militia, but the same as archer. They're considered like basically medium level unit. They're medium crossbow infantry, and those are medium bow infantry. The slightly upgraded version of these crossbowmen is what's called heavy crossbowmen. Heavy crossbowmen, if we see here compared to them, gets more ammo. It's kind of like the biggest buff. Has insane armor. So because these guys have insane armor, they can basically go into these archery duels with standard archers. You win those because 1, you outrange them, so you get a couple shots in first, and 2, you get to block a lot of the archer damage, because the archer damage is mostly base damage, which you reduce significantly with your armor. Once again, these guys have okay morale and okay health. The fire rate is their weakness. The fire rate and the amount of ammo they carry is their weakness. Their strength is really their range and high armor piercing damage, as well as decent armor. Before we talk about these two, which is kind of unique, let's talk about some faction unique units. Here's are the Fury of Beihai. and the Thunders of Jian. These are Kongrong, right here, faction unique units. So because they're faction unique, you can actually recruit these on all general type as long as you're playing Kongrong. I don't know if that's good unless you have like a non-strategist with really high cunning. Maybe you want to consider that, or maybe you just want to run these on everyone. I don't know if I would recommend that, but so they are much better than crossbowmen. They have the same range, right? They have the same range as crossbowmen here of 250. They have the same damage, but they have almost twice the amount of ammo. They also do much better in melee, 22 and 7 versus 8 and 2. They have slightly less armor, but they have much better fire attack, like range attack rate, right? You're basically firing almost twice every time they fire, and you have more ammo to do it, and you're doing the same high damage. It really makes these guys really scary. Their upgraded version, so these are available for every general at level 3 or higher, and these at level 6 or higher. These guys are basically the same as these, except for you get even more ammo, a little bit more ammo, and you get a little better armor stat, a little bit better evasion stat, and a little bit higher charge damage, and a little bit higher morale. So honestly, between these two units, these are much more expensive than these units. For just 3 more ammo, you don't actually gain much. So Inferior Beihai is like the powerful crossbow unit you should use if you're playing Kongrong. It's not worth the cost or the level investment to get Thunder of Jian. So I believe these are the best crossbow units in the game compared to these two. And if you're just normal faction that is not Kongrong's faction, you can only use regular crossbowmen. Both of these are good choices. Obviously, the weakness here is the lack of ammo, and how to counteract that is just use them on strategists with really high cunning, and you should be fine. If you don't have a strategist with really high cunning, perhaps you can consider using heavy crossbowmen. Once again, these upgrades, it's going to be a big jump in terms of recruitment costs as well as upkeep costs. So if you could just get by with regular crossbowmen instead of heavy crossbowmen, it's much preferred. Lastly, we have these two slightly niche type of units. They're what's called the repeating crossbowmen. What they do is actually what's called suppression. They only have 100 range. They're the shortest range unit in the game. They don't carry a lot of ammo with them, and the basic version is completely worthless. They only do 26 base damage, range damage. They do 0 armor piercing damage. I would never recruit these units in armor. I don't recommend you doing so. They don't fire particularly fast. Apparently they're supposed to be used to hold down your line with the enemy cavalry charging really close. You let these go, let them shoot, and act as a suppression. I think there's a debuff called suppression that they apply, but with the damage that you do, it's just not great. These guys are the upgraded version of repeating crossbowmen. They're heavy repeating crossbowmen. Like the heavy crossbowmen, you get the big armor jump. You get more ammos versus the regular one, but you still only has 100 range. You still only do base damage. So these guys basically job is not to do damage to the enemy, but to really apply that suppression debuff, which I think hampers their charge damage. I'm not entirely sure on that, because I really haven't found like a use for these guys. I feel like if you set up your army correctly, which is what we're going to be talking about next, you won't have the issue where you have to rely on your range units to do suppression against enemy charging cavalries or charging infantry to hold them back. You should have other ways to do that. So yeah, that sums up our discussion of the units themselves. These covers all the range units in the game, except for the trebuchets, which I think most of you are really familiar with already, and we already talked about in our siege videos. I'll go over them again. But next we're going to be talking about how we utilize our strategists and range units in an army composition. So usually I recommend you have a general that's cavalry general, infantry general, and a strategist in any army composition. So that could be a strategist, champion, vanguard, or strategist, sentinel, commander, or some combination between choosing a champion or a sentinel as your melee and choosing a commander and vanguard as your cavalry. And obviously the strategist is the mainstay of any army. They provide trebuchets, they provide range units, they provide formations for your other infantry and cavalry units. Once they level up, you unlock formations automatically by leveling up your strategist. So here, if we look at this army composition right here, I didn't add any cavalry units because they won't be lined up with your main line anyways. You might keep a few cavalry in the back to intercept enemy cavalry charges, but overall you're really setting up your infantry and range unit line. In this case, I picked Huang Zhong as our sentinel because Huang Zhong is actually really synergizes with range units. He has a unique ability that no one else has called Swift Fingers. It's a passive buff that gives 100% range attack rate, so it doubles how fast you fire all your range attacks. And it's not a passive ability. You don't need to activate it. You just need to keep Huang Zhong within 50 meters of whatever range unit you want to buff. So if he's standing in the middle of your range units, this buffs pretty much everyone here, and all of them will be doing basically double the DPS, right? You're doubling your damage output because you're firing at twice the rate, making him one of the strongest units to be included in a range heavy army composition. Talking about range heavy army compositions, sentinels are actually best paired for those type of armies, because sentinel also has a skill that all generic sentinel can unlock that provides 10% armor piercing range damage, and they can also unlock fire shots themselves. So if I have a sentinel like Huang Zhong, what I would do is I would give him, they're purple. They are specialized in recruiting saber and axe infantry. I personally prefer saber. They do a little less damage in combat, melee combat, but they have 5% extra range block chance. They default at 50, and the axe infantry have 45%. So I prefer the extra 5% here. What I do with them is I put them in shield wall formation in front of the line. So my infantry's job in my range army compositions is to soak up the enemy range units damage. Right, you're lined up far away from the enemy. They're coming towards you because you have trebuchets, right? Trebuchets changes the dynamic of the battlefield, because when you have trebuchets, the enemy always marches towards you. So you can sit back and wait for them to come to you. You don't have to march towards them. This helps with your fatigue. This also buys the most time for your range unit to do damage before the infantry line ever meets, right? So your infantry job is just basically halt their range units at whatever range that they can hit your infantry, and they'll just stop and they'll shoot at your infantry. And your infantry job is just to soak up that damage so that it buys time for your range units to wipe out their army. So these guys' jobs soak up damage. If their range block chance is over 100%, then the enemy archers won't shoot at them. They'll just keep walking. So in this case, your base is 50. Shield wall adds 35% to it. So you're at 85%, right? That's pretty much as high as you can get without going over 100 in the game. I've yet to find something like 90 or 95%. So you're at 85% with shield wall. You're letting the enemy fire at you. You're taking that damage. If you look at, I guess, if we visually look at them on the ground, they're pretty much just, stacked shields, and they'll just absorb that arrow damage while your range units are doing damage. The weakness of having a sentinel here is that you have, well, I guess you could have 6 units of these guys in the front, which would be a little bit better, I guess, in terms of how many infantry you have. What I did instead is I gave them 2 archer militia, and I put them on the right and left flank, and their job is to shoot fire arrows. Because if you're trying to set up your sentinel as part of a range army, and you want them to fully utilize that, the skills you need are you need to give your infantrymen charge reflect, or that's big because you don't have access to spear units, so enemy cavalries can just run you over if you don't have that. If you have charge reflect on your infantrymen, or at least charge negate, I think you get charge negate from a skill. That way at least your infantrymen can withstand the enemy cavalry charges just by bracing in a shield wall formation, because shield wall also give you 900% charge resistance. So this is big. This makes them effective counter cavalry even though they're not spear units, and you can get 10% armor piercing damage on your whole army. You don't need to be the commander of the army, just own army. So you add 10% armor piercing damage to all your range units, right? Your crossbowmen is going to be using that range units. Your trebuchets are going to be relying on that armor piercing damage, right? If you look at trebuchets, flammable rounds, it's range damage, armor piercing range damage, armor piercing explosion damage, and some base explosion damage. So by increasing armor piercing damage by 10%, you're actually increasing that damage output by a lot. And since you as a sentinel is providing the archers that has the flaming shot, right? Like I said earlier, you want your flaming shot on your weakest range unit. You free up your strategist to recruit crossbowmen, right? High damage crossbowmen, high range, high armor piercing damage, which synergizes once again with your sentinel's armor piercing damage buff. So this is more effective as a range composition than if you just rely on your strategist to recruit a few bold archers to shoot flaming shot. You free up that job to your sentinel. Your sentinel still has 4 infantrymen. I line them in the front and I spread them out a little bit. Even though there's a little gap, the enemy can't technically charge their unit through this gap. It's very difficult for them to maneuver their cavalry into this thin line that can just fit. So they'll crash into your infantry and they'll just be stalled there. So these infantry can stop enemy infantry, can stop arrow, can stop charges from cavalry. The only weakness of this setup is that your flank is your side flanks are exposed because you don't have enough men to cover up the sides. So enemy cavalry could be running you from the side. That's why you should maybe keep a few cav units on the side to just intercept them as they approach you. All you need to do is have something to disrupt their charge so that they don't hit your line of range units, and you'll be fine. So this is a very high damage output range unit army composition I like to use in my fights. Alternatively, this is the more standard setup. This is the champion setup. If you have a champion as your infantry general in the army, here we put Guan Yu out here. So these guys get spear units. I just gave him the most upgraded version, the heavy spear guard. You can also use regular spear guard. G militia and all G infantry I don't recommend as much because they don't carry shields, and because they don't carry shields, they can't function as their main job as range absorption. Alright, if you line your G militiamen in the front of your archers, the enemy archers will just destroy them, right? You won't even last till the enemy infantry line hits you. You're gonna be like half wiped out. So the key of these spear guards, whether they're regular spear guards or heavy spear guard here, is they have access to 2 formations, one called turtle. Turtle makes them arrow proof, right? 100% range block chance and 500% range resistance. You do suffer some melee attack rate, but that's fine. Their job is not really to do damage. Their job is to absorb damage. They cannot run. Circle is the other stance, which I have here. Circle only has plus 25% range block chance. So at base of 50, it goes to 75%. It still has great charge resistance. It has good improved melee evasion. Also minus melee attack rate. Also immobilizes you. So the good news about champions is that you don't have any arrow skill on you, so you don't need to recruit any archer militias. So you will have 6 units of infantry, and you can set up flank guards on the side that prevents enemy cavalry from charging into you. Like if you put your range unit inside this little area here, the enemy will not be able to damage them at all. There's no way they can come in and break through this line to get into you. These guys have high morale, high HP, counters cavalry, counters infantry. They can hold the line forever. So your range unit can do their work with a peace of mind. But when you set it up like this, make sure you always remember to have one unit that's facing front to be in circle rather than being turtle. If everyone's in turtle formation, the enemy range units won't shoot at any of them and will just march closer to shoot at your range units. And we don't want that. We want them to be shooting at these guys. So even though they're only absorbing damage at 75%, it's still something you want to consider, right? You want them to be the ones taking the arrow damage rather than your 0% range block chance, archers. So you can just probably imagine moving this group of archers and ranged units into this little enclave here, surrounded by these spearmen, and you'll be fine. You can also, if you see them taking too much range damage, you can switch this group to turtle and then unlock this group into circle, just so that they switch off the damage. But as long as someone's taking that damage, it's buying time for your range unit to be doing damage back at them. And then you always have your third general that's a cavalry general, disrupting their back lines or charging in to do what's called the anvil and the hammer technique, where these guys act as like the anvil. You let the enemy infantry collide into it, and you would drive your cavalry from behind and smashes them like a hammer to rout them. That's obviously very effective, but that's not really what we're doing here with our talk about range units. I think I pretty much summed up all the range units in the game, what their role are. In terms of cost efficiency, I prefer just regular crossbowmen. Obviously, if you're playing Koro, Fury or Beihai is just what you want to have. If you're trying to add archer units into the mix of range units, Onyx Dragon is what only unit I can really recommend, because they match the crossbowmen in terms of range. They have a lot of ammo. They have good morale. Just overall very impressive unit, and they're very capable in combat too after you run out of arrow, which seems like impossible with 60 ammo. So I recommend Onyx Dragons. I recommend using crossbowmen. Fury or Beihai is excellent. If you're just trying to get a little bit of flaming arrows action to help reduce morale, for that I believe Archer Militia is like sufficient enough. You can utilize Archer Militia in your Sentinels army group or in your Commander's army group, because both of those classes can unlock fire arrows, so they'll work well with just recruiting some 1 or 2 units of Archer Militia and mix them into your range line, so that they provide that little bit of morale reduction as enemies come closer to you, to make the difference of breaking them. Aside from that, early game, obviously you don't have money, so you're starting with a lot of Archer Militias. Once you do have a little money, go for the Crossbowmen, which is just $30 in terms of upkeep per turn jump. It's a very small jump for the extra range, extra damage. It's well worth it. So if you plan out your strategists to be in an army where you don't need to do the fire shots, don't get that skill. That skill only provides you with night battle and fire arrows. It doesn't add much to your kit. You can get all the other ranged skills and utilize mainly crossbowmen and rely on the night battle and the fire arrow ability from one of your other generals, whether they're your commander or they're your sentinels. Yeah, I think that sums it up. These Defender of Earth are very specialized. They're good units, they do a lot of damage, but don't think of them as archers, think of them as trebuchets. And obviously trebuchet in every army. Whether you want 1, 2, or 3, or 4 trebuchets is really up to you. They're really slow. I would recommend no more than 2. If you have more than 2, what happens is that They're really good during sieges where the enemy's not running towards you or not coming at you from different directions. They're just sitting behind the walls, and you have, you know, 4 trebuchets firing down the city. Obviously that's great, but that makes that army less flexible, right? If you get caught out in the field, or worse, you get caught out in an ambush, those trebuchets aren't going to be doing anything for you, right? They're just going to be sitting ducks in the middle of an ambush. Rather, you maybe having 2 is a good balance. Having 1 is okay too. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they see how great trebuchets are and they just rely on them so heavily. Myself included, I make that mistake all the time. But all you really need is 1, right? By having that 1 trebuchet, that job is to change the dynamic of the battle by allowing you as the attacker really play the role of defender, right? You have that trebuchet set up, the enemy AI charges at you. That's what you want to happen, right? Without a trebuchet in the army, if you're attacking an enemy in open field or in one of those siege fight where they don't have a defensive settlement, you have to run towards them. That's just makes it much more difficult for you to come out of the battle casualty free, right? You have 1 trebuchet unit, they come towards you. That's what you want out of your trebuchet. So obviously, but they do a lot of damage, so maybe having 2 works. They're expensive though. They cost like 1,000 to build and 280 to upkeep. So early game, just when you get your first strategist in the army, just get 1 trebuchet. Save that money early. Use that 1 trebuchet to help you change the dynamics of the battle, and that's good enough. Once you have a little bit more economy going, get that 2nd trebuchet. They level up quite quickly because they get a lot of kills every fight. Once they're level 10, accuracy improves by a lot, and you'll be doing very well. I hope this different format of the lessons from Battlefield is helpful. Even though we didn't do any fighting, I just wanted to go over all the range units and what I think about them and how to utilize them in terms of how they function in the army. Please, if you enjoy the content, please like, subscribe, and comment below, and let me know if you want me to continue doing these for other units in the game. And hope you guys have a good day. Bye.